Welcome everyone to our virtual author event with Phyllis Barber. And hold it, I need to admit one more. Okay,
You can see in here.
I'd like you to stay muted unless you're Phyllis. Okay. So mute yourselves if you're, okay, I'm gonna
There's
mute her. Okay. All right. Okay. Let's get, I don't know, she's taught.
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, good. I want you to, all right. Phyllis Barber, a native of Nevada, now a resident of Park City, Utah, writes about the West, the desert, the Mormons who played a significant role in settling the West and creating the person she's become, and about matters of the spirit with its familiar and unfamiliar reaches. She's dedicated to a face-to-face writing style inspired by her commitment to being honestly alive, by accepting the reality of what is, and by speaking her truth as she understands it. A risk-taking writer, she writes frankly and unblinkingly about the jagged, unpredictable edges of things. She's also a consummate artist with the written word. I can attest to that. I'm going to read something aloud if she doesn't read it. For over 40 years, she's been writing award-winning stories, articles, essays, and novels. In addition to being the mother of 4 sons, teaching fiction and creative nonfiction in the MFA in Writing program at the Vermont College of Fine Arts, riding her bicycle 1,000 miles across the Midwest one summer. How old were you when you did that?
50.
Wow, I'm impressed.
It was a very bad decision.
Traveling the world, reading across a wide spectrum of books, serving as a community volunteer, playing the piano professionally, and accompanying a diverse variety of musicians. In 2005, she was inducted into the Nevada Writers Hall of Fame. And she has now come out, is this your 9th?
Yes.
This is your 9th book. The Desert Between Us. And if you want, I have copies here in the bookstore. And I've got her signed nameplates so that you can get a signed copy. If you want to call the store at 435-619-8200 afterwards and order a copy, we can mail it to you. I don't know where all of you are, but we can media mail it out to you or have it direct shipped. So I'm going to turn the time over to Phyllis now so that she can introduce her book and do a reading. And we'll have time at the end for questions. Feel free to write your questions in the chat room, okay? And I'll try and keep track of them that way. So Phyllis, go ahead.
Thank you, Tanya. And thank you, all of you, for being here. I had 7 meetings canceled because of the virus, and to do this is like, oh, wow. It's huge. So thank you, Tanya, and thank you, all of you, for coming. I will be reading a little bit, an excerpt from The Desert Between Us, but I wanted to give you a little bit of so you'd understand the story. In actuality, in 1858, the U.S. government, under the direction of Jefferson Davis, who was the Secretary of War before he became president of the Confederacy. Anyway, he brought 75 camels from the Mideast. And the reason they did this was they wanted to explore an alternative route to California, because everybody was trying to get there and they were causing lots of problems with south with the Apaches and north with the Donner Party, etc. So this was an expedition trying to explore another route, and it was very waterless. So they needed camels. They wanted to experiment with camels. After the expedition, Jeffrey Scott, who's one of the road builders or helps explore, he goes north to St. Thomas, which is a Mormon settlement. And he is with his business partner, Kwan Yumai, who's a Mojave Indian, and a camel named Adababa. So when you, I see that my battery is low. I've got to plug it in just 1 second. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, there, we're plugged in. Anyway, so Jeffrey Scott goes north to St. Thomas, and he falls in love with the third wife of a polygamist named Sophia, and the polygamist is named Charles Weston Hughes. So those are people that'll be mentioned in the reading I'm about to give. And Adababa, again, is the camel. Oh, the joys of. Charles sees his yard now, his place of rest, his shelter, his castle, he even wants to think sometimes. But the place he's built is an adobe with an arrowweed roof, sun-dried sand and clay brick with straw mixed in to make everything stronger. Adobe, lumber, or brick, this is his home. Too much flooding in the first site they chose, too much water and then no water. I'll never understand this place, he says to his horse in the desert. Sophia better have something to eat. And that woman, he's gotten into the habit of talking to himself when no one is around. I don't know what to do about her. She's promised to stay by my side, though this sure isn't the lakes she talks about in that poem she repeats when she thinks I'm not listening. She probably won't see that country again. Brother Brigham asked me to keep building the kingdom. I told him I'd go where he pointed. I did. No hesitation on my part. I believe in Zion and in God's word, but all the same, I wonder if there's a God in St. Thomas. Unless God's the sun that pours over us every day, presses us flat like sludge, plays an I'm a lot bigger than you are game with us, God showing us we aren't much, me and the cacti. He smiles at the comparison because people have called him something like cactus before. Lot 37, one of the vineyard lots, that's his. He's built at least 7 homes since meeting up with the saints. A lot of homes, if he says so himself. He's been devoted. Nothing else needs to be said about it. But he doesn't like people. Thinks they're annoying fools. This 2.5 acres of land at the outer edge of what will soon be a town suits him just fine. He envisions Sophia tending grapes with unlimited water he'll get from somewhere. But for now, he sees wavy lines boiling the top of his willow roof. Something isn't right when a body can see heat. He dismounts midnight and ties him to the hitching rail he's built next to the road, next to a tall mesquite where the horse might find a drop of shade. Sophia, he calls out. No answer. Sophia? Still no answer. Funny, she's usually home, usually comes out to greet him. Sophia, where'd you take yourself? Charles' mind plays games before something that's not the truth talks back at him. Sophia! When she doesn't appear, his thoughts scramble. I'm going to interrupt to tell you that some of Charles's language was of the time, and it was before the term hecky darn was created. So when she doesn't appear, his thoughts scramble. Maybe she's dragged off by the Indians who love her dark hair. Sophia's nowhere to be found except in Charles's imagination. He feels off key, his nostrils widen, his boots sound heavy on the dirt as he heads for the door and calls her name for all in St. Thomas to hear. Sophia! Sophia Hughes, where are you, girl? There's nothing to be seen in the only 2 rooms where she could be, nothing moving. He stands at the door, hesitates. The sound of the cicadas beats through the heat of midday. The heat won't stop pouring into all of his folds, and Charles wants to unbutton his skin, take it off, turn it inside out, and throw it on the floor and stomp on it. This heat's meaner than a snake, he says to the walls. Sophia, he yells as loudly as he can until the Thea echoes. Damn that woman, he mutters. Damn her when she's supposed to be here. Where in tarnation is she? Suddenly, Portia Kimball is in the yard, all the time putting her nose into everyone's business. Charles doesn't want to hear from her, but there she is, walking toward his door the same as he's standing there, too late to duck behind the canvas. Charles, Portia, font of all local information, speaks with authority. Calm yourself down. Sophia has gone to borrow cinnamon from Nettie down the road. Dessert for you, lucky man. But you should see the camel. And an Indian taller than any man I've ever seen. What are you talking about, he says, trying not to be testy, then pays no attention to her answer. He doesn't want to hear that woman's mind at work, so steps back to pull the canvas closed. Separation. The brutal heat doubles and triples and decorates everything that woman hears and passes along. No one's story save with her. He pulls the canvas closed then. He can tell through the slits on the open sides of the canvas that she's turned back toward her home. Thank God for small things, he says to the dust she's leaving behind. Good riddance, he says, not caring if he's heard or not. Where did Portia get her ideas about camels and Indian? Balderdash. They both hear him calling. Jeffrey Scott, who's returned from the river and now sits next to Ada Baba behind the house, his heels dug into the sand, his arms wrapped around his knees, and Sophia, who's returned from Nettie's house, carrying a teaspoon of borrowed cinnamon in a too large bowl. Charles, she whispers, hurrying faster toward her home, feeling worried by the timbre of his voice. She has not had time to assemble her surprise dessert, and he's worked up, which isn't news to her. When she sees his horse tied to the rail, she stops to stroke the animal's wet neck. Welcome home, Midnight. But then suddenly the horse's nostrils are widening, sniffing something alien's alarming. There's an abrupt revision in its eyes, rolling white, reeling in their sockets. Frozen for a moment, assessing, Midnight snaps to high alert and snorts deep from his lungs, his ribs expanding like bellows. He twists his neck and snaps his head skyward as if a string pulled him taut to the heavens. A thick rope of muscles bulges beneath his tangled mane. Then he turns his circles and snorts again. His hoofs spark off the scattered rocks. Fear flares his nostrils, pink and glossy, fills his chest, pricks his tail. Fear rather than blood courses through Midnight's veins. Charles, she shouts. Your horse, she shouts louder. Come out here right now. In less than 5 seconds, his hat back on his head, Charles bolts from the inside of the house, runs to the railing, grabs the rein tied in a knot, and jams his foot into one stirrup. Charles on Midnight's back, the horse skittering from side to side. Crazy horse, he yells. Settle down, you damn fool. Midnight bucks. Charles slips from one side of the saddle to the other, half on, half off. This horse gone off its head. Sophia, what happened? His voice is bounced into nonsense and hard to translate. Charles flips one leg over the top and leaps from the frantic animal, working itself into a white lather. Reins still in hand, he raises his arms, makes himself large, tries to take command. Midnight, whoa, 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 boy, easy. The horse keeps bucking, opening and closing like a jackknife. It runs in a jagged circle, tethered to Charles, who hangs onto the reins with every muscle he has. This drags him a few feet before he gets his footing again. Putting the precious bowl of cinnamon on the top doorstep, Sophia stands open-mouthed, her hands against her cheeks. Midnight bucks himself toward the back of the house, and thus, Ada Baba becomes a greater part of the chaos. Jeffrey Scott standing by his side, its eyes half-hooded, a prince of Araby who owns half the world and counts no one as his equal. Charles Weston glares, his temper surfacing, his volcanic temper she hates to witness. Sophia, Sophia, son of a bitch, she shouts over the frenzy of Midnight's hoof still striking the ground, the horse dead set on bolting from Charles's hold. She runs toward him, but he holds out his hand to stay her where she is. What's happened since I rode off this morning? What? I was out here just hanging my wash. Ada Baba is leaning forward onto its knees, rising. Jeffrey Scott trying to keep the camel seated so as not to further frighten the horse. But Ada Baba has its own mind, and that would be that the horse is annoying the camel's sense of peace and quiet and interrupting a contemplative meal. The camel lets out a ram-like complaint when he finds his feet, his strange two-toed feet with a padded heel, no shoes to protect them, large feet on spindly legs, knobby knees. A strange concoction. When Ada Baba stands to full height, he stretches his neck to fetch another mouthful of thorny mesquite. Never having seen or smelled a creature like this before, Midnight spins crazy wild berserk, catches Charles Weston off guard, knocks him down, yanks the reins from his hands. Fury, horse on fire, in a flurry, galloping down the road. What the hell was that? Charles struggles to stand on the jagged road, then dusts himself off, his mouth wide open. Sophia knows better than to say anything. Not a word. She also knows he's due for a mail run tomorrow morning. While he was out digging ditches, a larger than usual bag was brought by Seth, the express writer from St. George. It's Charles' turn to disperse the letters, parcels, the news about the aftermath of the South being brought to its knees over secession and the developing slavery issues, according to Seth, that is. No man should be another man's slave, he'd added to his endless chatter. Charles slaps his hat on his hip, glowers at everything, his stare white hot, his eyes ready to snap into pieces. He is annoyed beyond anything Sophia has seen before. She can see the bald spot at the back of his head, the white skin exposed to the sun that boils and bakes and fries everything in sight. His beard is streaked with more than the usual gray and filled with dust, and at this moment, he looks like the devil personified. He shifts the weight of his feet to find a reliable stance on the mud-dried road being a poor term for the rutted, greasy caliche affair that has dried into stiff peaks and valleys. Damned road, damned horse, he's saying. This needs to be stuffed up someone's arse. He attempts balance on the uneven road that needs to be graded as soon as someone can pay that kind of attention or find that kind of machinery full of impossible ruts that break wagon wheels, hopefully not his horse's legs. When the dust settles enough to see clearly, Sophia sees Cleet in the distance, a man who lives down the road, jumping on his horse and galloping after midnight, dead run. She watches him throw a lasso over the frantic horses' necks until they both disappear in their own blinding cloud of dust. Oh, Charles, she says, wanting to put her arms around him. How lucky is that, she says instead. Never in my whole life, he can't, shaking his head. Midnight never runs like that, never. And I'll get that SOB who caused this trouble. He walks to the side of the yard, then shakes his head in disbelief. Is that a camel in our backyard, he asks. Where'd that come from? It doesn't belong here, it belongs to the Arabs. The ball of fury is growing, not a surprise from the man who uses anger to deal with most anything out of his expected order. Sure, he delivers mail long distances, digs irrigation ditches endlessly, channels water for crops that aren't meant to be here, neat rows of alfalfa, lucerne, wheat, hopefully next season, let alone cotton Brother Brigham wants for the home industry project. He's even been on a mission for the church, to England, though he never crossed paths with Sophia there. But he's full of rage that frightens Sophia, who backs away from him out of the way of his twitching arm and his balled up fist. Where had this anger come from? The stranger and the camel have done nothing wrong except arrive here. Is it she herself, his youngest wife, too frail, too fragile, his delicate flower, he often calls her, whose first child has died already? A tiny girl not able to withstand bad water and choking dust, not adding to Charles Wesson's progeny, and now his horse. Yeah.
That's great. So have you read a lot of Westerns?
I've read quite a few. I've read a lot of books.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. You got a real good feel. I got a real good feel for the dialogue there. I wanted to know, first of all, remember all of you, if you have any questions, put them in the chat room and I'll read them aloud, okay? When did you first learn about the introduction of Arabian camels to the American desert? And was that the seed that sprouted this book?
Yes, it was a seed that sprouted this book. And I heard about when I heard about the camels about, 12 years ago, I said, camels in the United States, in the Southwest? So I did a lot of research. And then that led to writing this book.
Okay, so I just wondered if it was that or if you had wanted to do a love story after the Civil War involving polygamy. Have you written other books involving polygamy?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So how did you meld the love story into this? How did you get to that?
After a lot of trouble. Well, first of all, I wanted to write a book that wasn't just about Utah, or about polygamy, about the Mormon experience. I wanted to cover a broader scope And so I thought, and I wanted to find out how the camels got here. So that kind of happened. And then uh, it was like, oh, there's got to be something more here. So I have Jeffrey Scott go north and go to St. Thomas. And I'm from Boulder City, Nevada. I was born there. And St. Thomas wasn't that far away, and it defunct when I was growing up. But all of those things were fascinating to me, so I wanted to tie them all together.
Cool. Okay. All right. You told us something about the plan to bring camels. You mentioned Jefferson Davis, who was the Secretary of War before they seceded. And it was his idea to bring camels to build a road to California.
Yes, there was an alternate route to the California gold fields. People were taking the southernmost route near Tucson, and then there was a lot of trouble with the Apaches. And then the northernmost route was troubled by weather. They only had so much time they could get through, so they wanted to find an intermediate route to go to California. So and that was through Albuquerque to where Needles is now. And it was the origin of Route 66.
So the camels arrived before Jefferson Davis and the South seceded?
That all happened about the same time.
About the same time.
Okay.
Okay.
And Jefferson Davis wasn't the only one interested in it, but he was the person responsible for getting them here.
Okay. There's a question from Susan Wolf. When researching for an historical book, how do you put the collection of facts into the manuscript? Timeline? Or do you create and this gets to another question I had about whether you outline or you just sit down and start writing?
Well, I'm a touch and go kind of writer and feel my way through, so I don't outline. But writing a historical novel is hard because how much you stick to the facts, and then how you have to remember you're writing a novel of fiction as well. So that was always a balance for me. And I had to, for a while, I was too much sticking to the historical truth of everything, or that what I had researched. Who knows if it's the truth or not. Anyway, but I tried to stick with that. But then I thought I need to have more of a story here as well. And so but I have some connection to St. Thomas. My great-grandfather was a mail carrier. My great-great-grandfather was a mail carrier there. So I thought, oh, I'll make this character a mail carrier, but a very angry polygamist he was. But I don't know that. I think my great-great-grandfather was very angry too. Rumors.
Okay. Now, I know you had to do an awful lot of research. What was the most challenging thing to research in terms of time and difficulty?
Well, the so-called Camel Charge, which there was a whole book written called The Camel Charge, where the Mojave Indians did not want the expedition to cross back across the Colorado River. They had allowed them to cross over the first time. But then when they wanted to come back, and Lieutenant Beale had to go back to Washington to give a report to the powers that be, and then he was on his way back and doing some road building. Anyway, the Mojaves didn't want the so-called white people to cross there. So there was a big thing planned, whereby there were I heard rumors from 1,000 to 10,000 Indians. Who knows what the truth is on that. But they used 20 camels and they blasted their way into this barricade that the Indians had established and frightened them. So that was one of the hardest things, because I didn't want it to sound like the Mojaves were crazy or anything, but I mean, they'd never seen camels before, and they'd never seen them running at full power as those camels were unloaded and they ran at full force. So that was the most challenging.
So you didn't travel to the Middle East to research camels?
I've been to the Middle East, but no.
Not to research camels. Okay.
There was I think I started to tell you, there was a man who has a petting zoo in Grantsville, Utah,
Yeah.
and he has several camels, and dromedary and Bactrian both. And so anyway, I got out and got to hang out with some camels, and that's where I had my picture taken with the camel.
Well, when I was in, between the summer between my high school, I graduated from high school in Beirut, Lebanon. And before I went off to the BYU, my mom was the travels and tourism chair for the American Women's Club in Beirut.
Oh
She
my!
arranged a camel caravan through the Gulf of Aqaba. And so I went on that, and
Oh my!
it's hard to ride a camel for more than an hour. I'll just say, leave it
Well,
at that.
the horsemen did not like the camels at all. And they were eventually basically kicked out. There were some kind of cruel things done to the camels, but a lot were just left to, and that's how Jeffrey Scott ended up with a camel.
Ah.
He was one of the ones that had been abused or neglected.
Can you talk about, there's an interesting, because he meets the camel driver and becomes friends with Haji Ali,
Yeah.
is that his name?
Mhm.
Can you talk about how you combine the culture of the American West and with the desert life of Arabia? How?
Well, I couldn't do a whole lot of that because it would be another story.
Mhm.
But when Haji Ali came, he was very protective of his camels, and a lot of people, like I say, did not know how to deal with camels at all. And the horsemen disliked them immensely, partially because their horses disliked the camel. Horses were frightened by the camels. So, but Haji Ali went with them on that trip on the expedition because somebody needed to be in charge of the camels, somebody who knew them well.
Yeah.
And so I tried to, and the real Haji Ali basically ended up going to Mexico, where he could pass a lot better in the population than he could, because there was
that was his real name?
Yes, that was his real name. And Lieutenant Edward Beale was a real name. I used some real names and some
Yeah.
no.
No, I understand. I understand. Okay. I wondered wait. Let me see. I had some. No, I'll ask that last. As a writer of many novels, has your approach to writing changed over the years? And if so, how?
Okay, I haven't written many novels. I've written 2 others. And the other books I've written have been collections of short stories.
Okay.
And memoir, trilogy of memoir, and a couple of children's books. So I've been all over the map. But my writing, I'm more careful with my writing now than I was. I spend a lot more time. I realize how hard it is to write a book, and when I was first beginning, I didn't realize that. So there's a lot of attention that has to be given to getting things right.
Okay.
So I tried my best, but I just work, like I say, I work very hard at trying to get the language right and saying what I want to say, and that's how it's changed. Is I've just become more careful.
More careful. What is the easiest genre for you to work in? Is memoir
Probably
easy?
personal essay, which I've done a lot of. Yeah, and I'm currently working on a collection of essays, which is almost done.
Okay.
Which I'm gonna, but those are supposedly harder to market than the novels.
Yeah. Okay.
Somebody asked me a question privately, and it keeps coming on my screen and going up.
Were you?
I don't know.
Yeah. Were you surprised or delighted at where the fictional episodes took you in the writing process?
Oh, of course. I mean, it's like the fictional thing happened. The expedition, I tried to stick pretty much to historical details. But then when Jeffrey Scott goes to St. Thomas, I started using my own imagination about what it was like to live in I mean, it was my own imagination and not because I've grown up in the desert. But oh, I forgot where I was going. Where was I going?
It wasn't meant to be a private message. It was just, I
Oh,
pushed the wrong button.
hi, Sally. You
How
look
you
great.
You look great.
Oh, Sally was a student of mine at Vermont College, and we have
Really?
been really good friends. And I'm so honored and pleased to have you here today, Sally.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah.
You've taught me an awful lot.
I've been kind of hard sometimes.
It took me a long time to get that novel written, and you've written 3, and you said only 3, and I thought, no, only 3.
Well, I meant out of the 9 books. So anyway, it's really nice.
You gave a keynote address a few years ago to the Association for Mormon Letters. And you said that in writing this novel, you had been stymied by the relationship between fact and art, between a factual narrative and a creative one, between history and fiction. What side did you come down on in the end? And does it have to be a war?
You're shorting out a little bit on me, Tanya.
Oh
I
dear.
don't know why, but so I don't know that I got all that question.
I was quoting from your keynote address
Okay.
in which you said that you, in writing this novel, you had been stymied by the relationship between fact and art, between a factual narrative and a creative one, between history and fiction. And my question is, what side did you come down on in the end with this novel? And must it be a war?
Well, it was kind of like, how do you put it all together, and how do you make it blend so it doesn't sound too much like a documentary on, the expedition that happened, da 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 da. And it was hard to write about the Mormon polygamy because I wanted to write it for people who were not familiar with the situation instead of just those who were familiar with it.
Uh-huh.
So, but to come down where fact and fiction, your art, I think, wins out in the end. But you need to be very aware that especially with as an historical novel, you need to be aware that you're dealing with history and you can't bend it to your will.
That's true.
James Fry did on it.
Okay. I believe there are a few aspects to the novel that will resonate, particularly right now during this time of civil unrest and questioning of mistreatment of minorities. Can you talk about how Jeffrey Scott, the main character, is affected by his relationship with Haji Ali? And
he's friends
as
with
well
Haji
as the way he sees indigenous peoples too.
I can't remember the black slave, the black accompaniant, the guy who accompanied Dr. Beale. Lieutenant Beale. He was black, and he ends up leaving because he doesn't get. Beale is nice to him and is good to him, but he expects him to be his servant. Mm. So, in the end, why can't I remember his name? I should have read the book. Reread the book. He says, he basically says, I'm a man. They have an argument, and Jeffrey Scott hears it from a distance, and he hears this man say, I am a man, and he leaves. He's a black person who is in service to Professor, to Lieutenant Beale. So, and then Haji Ali, Jeffrey Scott, his mother was an abolitionist. So he was taught to be fair to all races and all people. So that has influenced the way he treats Haji Ali, the way he treats the black servant.
Also, the way he treats the Native Indians.
Right.
Yeah.
He treats everybody as they are equal and his equal. So I really, and I believe that too. So it was nice to have characters who thought the same thing.
Yeah.
It was nice to make up characters who thought the same thing.
Okay. What are you working on now?
What am I working on now?
Have you started, do you have another idea for a novel? Oh,
Well, right now I'm working, finishing up a collection of essays. I've published quite a few essays, and I thought, gee, I should put these all together. So we'll see what happens next.
okay. Are there any questions from any of the listeners?
Oh, I would love your questions. Please, please ask them. I know I never can ask questions, but anybody?
You said that writing fiction was harder than writing memoir. And I certainly have had that same experience. Why?
Well, personal essay comes very natural to me to talk about myself.
I got that.
I mean, I've had a kind of question that, and I have an essay that talks about that. Is it, why is this business of talking about oneself? And so that comes naturally. And to write fiction, you have to get in a little different state of mind, and not be so clinging to all the facts. So you have to take liberties and use your imagination. And I like to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I was taught to be so truthful and to always speak, like Dudley Do Right.
Well, and you do it well. You do well. And people who have lived amazing lives have a lot of things to talk about.
Well, hopefully
So it's
so.
okay.
Susan Wolf has a question. How long did it take to write the book? How many revisions did you have to do?
Well, it took me about 7 or 8 years, and I did a lot of research. Revisions, I probably rewrote the book about 5 times.
5, okay.
And that's not to say not about the small sections, some of which got rewritten much more than 5 times. I'm very meticulous.
Uh-huh. When you published this with the University of Nevada Press, do they have editors there that they went over your
Yes.
stuff and they made you do other revisions?
But they had one, yeah, they suggested a few revisions, some of which I really thought were good. Just because sometimes all of us are blind at some point.
Yeah.
And so it's a matter of having somebody say, oh, didn't you think about that? And it was like, oh, wait, no, I didn't. So.
Okay. And Susan Koenig asks, can you talk a little about your self-discovery as a writer, as your career?
Can I talk about what?
Can you talk a little about your self-discovery as a writer?
Your discovery.
As your career progresses.
Boy, you short out sometimes. That's why I'm having trouble hearing you. Anyway, I hope I understand. Hi, Susan, wherever you are.
Hi, Phyllis.
I don't see your picture, but hello, hello.
No, I'm cooking, so you can't see me.
Oh, okay. All right.
But about my wonderful teacher, about your self-discovery as a writer.
Oh, it's been a really magnificent process, and I like writing because you keep having to go back and say, is that really what I wanted to say? And so then you go back and back and back again, and so that is the self-discovery. And one of the things I discovered in this novel is that I try to be nice to most people, and they wanted me to make Charles Weston Hughes an angrier polygamist. So he is angrier than I wrote him originally. He's angrier in the book. But anyway, the self-discovery as a writer, I think writing is, you don't make a lot of money, but it's a wonderful way to explore the self and explore the things you're interested in. And I love it. I'm glad it's been my lifestyle.
Do you do most of your writing in the morning or in the afternoon or the evening?
I write in the morning. That's when by the evening I'm tired.
Yeah,
I mean, my mind is tired. I want to, I don't think as clearly, not that I think clearly, but in any time. Yeah, writing in the morning from about 8 to 12.
okay. And do you listen to music or you like quiet when you write?
Oh, I couldn't listen to music because I would listen to the music. You know, I'm a musician as well as a writer. I'm a pianist. I got a degree in music. But it's like I'm too interested in what's happening in the music to listen to it while I write.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to, you guys can think of more questions. I mean, I was going to read something that she quoted. I don't know if this stayed in the finished book. I can't recall. But this was from the keynote address that you gave. You quoted in
Okay.
terms of the power of language. This was an example you gave. And I think it's beautiful. The water of the river, a preposterously huge arm wrestling the canyons as it makes its way south. Broad, brackish, mostly red with sands picked up along the way, red sand rolling, turning over and over, an integral part of the water. Bigger than life to Geoffrey Scott as he surveys the ferry Hardy's built for those who want to cross here. The hefty rope stretched across, the flat-bottomed boat waiting on the bank. He holds Atababa's well-used rope, attached to the halter over its head, and looks at the narrowing of the canyon above the landing, the never-ending tumultuous water. The Colorado is larger than anything he's seen before, humbling, domineering in a land of mountains looking like piles of stacked, dried mud, and valleys of rock and dirt, a barren place for any body of water. On the surface, silent, but deadly below. There is a subterranean roar of water over rocks, the conflict submerged by the river. Unseeable forces beneath the surface. Powerful river, arbitrary. How has it come to be? Why is it here? And yet it is. It's
Some
just
of that survived, but not all of it.
not all of it, really?
And I really like it listening to it. I think, why did I leave it in there?
That's the hard thing, is to have to edit yourself. I write too, but I find, I have a hard time. Are you the kind of writer that writes your first draft without going back over anything? You just plow through the first draft?
In a novel, I can't do that. I do a few chapters until I get those right, and then I go on. And then
Yeah, exactly.
I couldn't just blast through and do the whole thing. That's not fun.
Well, what about someone who does a few words and then can't go on?
That happens on some days to me too.
Phyllis is a master of the extended metaphor, and what you just read, I think, is in all of her books. She can take a simple image and extend it until where you're flowing down the river and you're part of the entire scene. That's one of the things I've always admired about her writing.
Thank you, Sally.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sally. Well, thank you, all of you, for coming. It was really delightful to have you. Thank you. This virtual business is totally new to me, but hi, Sue. I see you. And the wheeze, as I don't see any more than the Sally. That's all I can see. So.
Oh, well, here, okay, there we go. Well, we have, okay, there's Susan Wolf. There aren't pictures.
Well,
for
wait a
everyone.
minute.
Yeah.
Are you looking at the gallery view?
There we go. She peeked out.
Stephen, Bill Traeger, my dear husband, who put up with all of this. Susan Wolf and
Hi,
Mimi
Bill.
Chris. Oh,
Yeah.
Virginia, hi. Oh, and I better. This is too exciting.
Okay, well.
Susan Foster and Bob, please. Oh, hello, Bob. I see your name, but I don't see your face. Maybe he's gone already. Well, thank you, Tanya.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye. Happy
Stay
reading.
safe. Bye.
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 Why was her name under?